Hi, everyone. I'm excited to welcome again, Julianne. Thank you so much for hopping on today.
Thanks for having me, Debbie. Really excited to be here.
I love chatting with you. I always learn so much. I think we have such a good time sharing some of the real, candid, um, things that come up during prenatal and postpartum period. So it's always a fun conversation. So thanks for getting on today.
Thank you.
The topic of today, though, is value of support. This really brings me to the whole reason why our videos and our podcasts are put out there. It's about bringing people back to the village. And I would often tell families, oh, it's okay to get someone in to help walk the dog, and it's okay to get someone in and maybe make you some meals, and it's okay to get a cleaning lady. And I would kind of dance gently around the topic, and they never really got it. They still
Mm,
thought they had to do it all. So this year I've been telling families, and I've said this a few other times in our recordings, I'm being blunt about it and telling them that if you're doing it by yourself, you're doing it wrong. And
right.
now they're getting it. So I feel
Hmm.
like sometimes we have to be right out there and just say what we're thinking. And in all honesty, this was never meant to be done alone.
Hmm.
And somewhere over the last 5 years, it started to become where we had to do everything by ourselves and we
Hmm.
had to look great doing it. So really important topic in terms of the value of support. So share a little bit with us about what that looks like, because there's so many different types of support. So
Yeah,
take it
well,
away.
I think this calls back to this, this proverb that we all have heard about. It takes a village to raise a child. And I do think that, it is designed to be done in community. So parents need that community care. And there are different forms of support. There can be peer support, which of course is coming from friends. There can be family support, which is coming from relatives. Partner support, of course, that can come from your partner, but not even some mothers don't even have, don't have that. And then there are some professional supports like, that's the work that I do as a registered perinatal support worker. Um, and then there might even be professional support can also include osteopathy, pelvic floor physiotherapy, mental health support. So there's a lot of different sources of support that can sort of make up the modern village.
That's amazing. Well,
Mhm.
maybe you can share a couple of common problems or complaints that you've heard from parents in terms of support and not having it. Maybe that's something you can share with us for those new parents out there listening.
Right. So, generally speaking, I would say in today's world, most families lack support. So, they don't have enough of that support system, to carry them through in the postpartum season. And sometimes that's just because we don't always think, actually think about our support systems. And then we get to postpartum and we realize, oh, I need more help, and we don't even know if we're allowed to ask for more help. But the truth of the matter is that asking for help is a really, really important part of becoming a parent. We need to be able to learn to ask for help. And I think one of the barriers for parents and mothers to not ask for help is they think it reflects poorly on their ability. But if we can just normalize this idea that, motherhood, parenthood is meant to be done in community, it was never meant to be a solo job. I think that's really important. The other thing to understand about support is that the research has demonstrated really clearly over and over and over again that, support can actually have a protective effect for you against postpartum depression. So it is really key in terms of, postpartum well-being, postpartum health, and just helping families thrive. So I'm really, really passionate about this topic for that reason.
That's amazing. Well, let's give some tips.
Yeah,
So in terms of
sounds
support,
good.
let's talk about what kinds of things can parents have. I'm just thinking if I should give you some examples. So let's talk about some average things. So support obviously for the baby. What kinds of
Support
support
for
would
the
be out
baby.
there that might be for the baby?
Okay, so specifically for the baby, if you're thinking about peer and family and partner, obviously it would be people in your in your support circle who might actually help to change a diaper, to do skin on skin with the baby, to hold the baby while you're resting or showering, that kind of thing. Professional support for the baby could include an osteopathy visit, so that if sometimes babies have really tight neck muscles and that can interfere with the breastfeeding process. So having a treatment for your baby that way. Of course, the well baby visits, that's a form of support for the baby. You have, your family physician, your nurse practitioner that's, weighing the baby and checking in on the baby. We could say the lactation consultant is for like mom, but really also for the baby, right? So some of these things are like for both. So there's a lot of different things that you can, access for babies.
Great. Now let's talk about the more domestic things. So things like walking the dog, keeping the house clean, doing the laundry, those types of things.
Yeah. So, I've said this on a previous podcast, but a lot of times they put a lot of energy into this piece regarding, the birth. So we think, oh, I have a pet. I'm gonna look at putting my pet into maybe like a pet service, a pet care service, while I'm in the hospital, while I've had my baby. But it's a really great idea to extend some of those services beyond then. So I've had clients who have put, sent pets away to family friends, or, to these businesses, these services that are kennels that keep their pets overnight for a few days during the early weeks of postpartum, so that they could just have one less thing to kind of do, one less responsibility, right?
Yeah. And even a dog walker, on that note, even if it was just a dog
Yeah.
walker that came a couple of times a day and took the dog for a walk.
Yeah,
Something like that
exactly.
too.
Other things to consider might be keep your housekeeper. A lot of times are, depending on your maternity leave situation, maybe your income is shrinking a little bit during that time. And so then we tend to sacrifice those things, but those are the things that we need. So maybe consider, instead of looking at it as a black and white, maybe consider the middle of the road and say, okay, well, maybe I can have them come every other week instead of every week, like the previous arrangement. But try to find ways to sort of prioritize some of those support services. Yeah. And
That's
I mean,
great.
yeah, anything that
You
can
and I
help.
both have talked in the past about this job jar thought as well, where if there are a lot of things that you want done that you can't get to, which is expected, toss them in a little container on a piece of paper. And when people come over, they genuinely want to help anyway. So,
They
if they say
do.
to you, what can I do? Tell them to reach in the jar and see what it says. And sometimes it might say, organize my front closet, or do a load of laundry for me, because people want to help. So those
Yeah,
are even
they
free
do want
tips.
to help. Exactly. And
Yeah.
it's just, even if it feels a little bit uncomfortable to ask for help, again, it's a muscle that we really need to develop. So just keep asking. It doesn't mean that you're not capable. It means that you're actually recognizing what your needs are, and asking for what you need is a sign of strength, is a sign of health. And so yeah, I think the job jar is really excellent. And honestly, those practical helps can come in all forms. Like I think of, a client who they decided, what, we're both off for a few weeks. So we had originally canceled our snow removal service because we figured, oh, we'll do it. They called their snow removal person again and said, okay,
Come
no,
back.
we need you to come back. So any little thing that somebody else can do for you, setting up a meal train, all those little things that can help. But again, I love the job jar idea, of course, and it helps to develop that asking for help muscle, but maybe in a little bit of more of a comfortable way, where you're not putting
Telling
people
them.
on the
Yeah.
spot, right?
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I think that's the thing, is a lot of us think, well, I'm home for a year, so I can clean the house, I can
Yeah.
make the meals, I can,
Yeah.
not realizing like you're just leaving one full-time job for another full-time job.
Yes.
You're not actually home for a year.
Exactly.
So it's important to shed that light. Here's something we maybe haven't touched on that some families are going through, but what about help with older children?
Okay, yeah, excellent. Definitely having childcare arrangements, or continuing with childcare even though you're home. Because again, a lot of parents think, well, we're off now, so it saves money. They can, pull their child out of daycare. They save money that way. But even just reducing the amount of days and having a handful of days a week where the older child will be in daycare, or any programs that might be available, day programs in the summertime, I think is worthwhile. Asking friends and family to, weekly, maybe set up a weekly thing where the grandparents, if they're available and they live nearby, can take the older child or older children. Just getting really creative about that. And again, I think the thing that does happen is we try and do it all in postpartum, and we actually, instead of keep continuing with some of these support systems, or instead of planning for them, we push them off to the side because we think, oh no, now we'll be home, so we're going to do it. But it's really important to have those supports in place so that, you can focus on your new full-time job, aka your newborn.
Which is so true. And I'll tell you, when my little ones were born, so I had my oldest was 16 months when my twins came. And I had a couple of very good friends in the same community as me that had children around the same time. And you know what? We're how do we do this? We really can't afford daycare. We can't afford, a nanny. So we exchanged care. So on Monday, I took her older child to play with my older child, which actually was helpful to me because it entertained her. And then on Wednesday, she would take my older child. So that gave me time with the twins alone, and it gave her daughter some company. So, really it's part of that village. And that village that we talk about, yes, your breastfeeding consultant and your PNSW and your RMT and your osteopath and all these people, but even thinking about the friends in your community that might be going through the same thing as you, that you can support each other and just give each other one day off, right?
That peer support piece is really big. And so even just to develop that and, and give it some time. Some people are new to the area, so they don't necessarily have that. So then it's finding places where, you'll meet other mothers, whether it's an online class or, certain programs, and just, taking that step to create some of those connections, because you're right, that peer support is really, really important. And when there are other barriers to accessing other types of support, often the peer support can come in and fill those gaps as well.
Yeah. And I know now with social media, it's quite easy. 20 years ago, we couldn't find each other in our community unless you were walking around the block. But with social media, it's easier now to go, hey, I've got a newborn and a 3-year-old. Does anyone else have a 3-year-old that maybe we want to do some play dates with? So
use social media for that. Join local moms groups on, on social media platforms and connect that way. Yeah, you're right.
And I want to wrap up this conversation with what we really started with before we even started the record button was, and that's why I saved this for the very end, is mental health, specifically perinatal or maternal mental health, whatever word you want to use. But I didn't start with that question because everything we just talked about impacts our mental health.
Absolutely.
So tell us a little bit about what you've seen and how these things have hindered or helped each parent.
Right. So definitely parents that have more support tend to have a better transition, or tend to have more resiliency in terms of coping with challenges and that come your way in the postpartum season, right? And people who lack support, this is when I see mothers get very exhausted very quickly. They don't recuperate as well. And again, sometimes it's a mindset issue where you could ask for help, but you feel that you're worried that it reflects poorly, so you don't. So really, I would stress that it's really important to reach out for help and to really understand that it's normal to need that help. And if you understand that support impacts your mental health, then that can be a motivator for you. You're investing in your well-being, you're investing in your future as well. By asking for help, by getting support, because again, we know the research is really clear that social support has a protective effect. It helps to protect you against postpartum depression. So it's really valuable.
Yeah, we know that, maternal mental health is often driven by hormones or by history. But all these
There,
things that we talked about today certainly impact the severity or
yeah,
how quickly we can bounce back and be
that's
resilient.
right. And to your point, you're right. There are other risk factors for maternal mental health, for perinatal or postpartum mood disorders. There's different, different titles floating around there to describe that experience. So yeah, there's definitely other risk factors that you might have, but by paying attention to that support piece and asking for help, you're still going to benefit from it, even if you have other risk factors.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We talked about so many great tips: getting support, getting sleep, eating better, getting some care for a baby, even the education piece. We didn't really
Hmm.
touch on that, but even learning about your baby and certain
Hmm.
things or quirks or things, newborn care topics. But all these things together are that support and that village that are going to maybe take your mental health from a 10 or from a 1 up to a 10. It's going to make it better.
It's going to make it
So
better. Yeah. And learning about maternal mental health, about postpartum mood disorders. What are the symptoms? What are the signs? And it can be a little bit, a little bit challenging to engage with those topics, especially if we, have fear of that happening. But it's really important to be educated on those topics, because we know that another thing with maternal mental health is that sometimes when you have something like postpartum depression, it can drag on and on and on. And part of the reason is that we don't know the signs. So we think, oh, I'm just exhausted because I have a new baby. This is just exhaustion. Or you don't really want to say anything because you don't want people to look at you in a different way. And so just knowing the signs will help you to ask for help at an early stage in the game, in the experience of postpartum depression. And the sooner you can get help, the better.
yeah, I love this. I love that, we've talked several times about all the things that we can do to help and prevent. But, so important to sit down and write your postpartum plan early on so that you're
Mm-hmm.
not now trying to think about how do we get the help when you're exhausted and you're hungry and you're
Mm-hmm.
struggling and your mental health is already being challenged. So it's a great suggestion just to sit down, even if it's with an expert,
Yeah.
just doing a quick call and saying, okay, what are all the things I need to think about? Help
Yeah.
me kind of devise a plan. All that's going to make a big difference. So
It
thank you so
does.
much
Yeah.
for sharing all that great wisdom. Love you so much. Where can everybody find
Oh,
you?
I love you too. Everybody can find me at positivebirthservices.ca. I'm on Facebook under that same handle, under that same name. And then I am actually on Instagram as Positive Postpartum.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Julianne. And thanks everybody for joining in today.
Thanks.